For the final part of our interview series with Ryan Payton, we continue our discussion around why the original Shenmue game did not capture the mainstream audience that it was intended for upon release. We also delve much deeper into the development of Shenmue III and discuss the future of the franchise going forward. I do have another set of congratulations for you. You seem to be sweeping up awards left, right, and centre for Iron Man VR with the PlayStation blog and PlayStation Universe's best VR game. So congratulations again.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that was a nice surprise for the team. We didn't win best VR from the Game Awards, but we were nominated and we were amongst some really strong candidates. We also won best. We won Game of the Year from the biggest PlayStation VR community out there called PSVR Without Parole.
Oh wow!
Yeah, that was over the weekend, and yeah, it was a really great thing for the team to see as they're going out on their holiday break.
Yeah, it's a nice booster for them, I imagine. I watched the Game Awards actually, and they were very complimentary of Iron Man VR. Certainly, the things I saw on Twitter and social media are very complimentary of it. So even though, unfortunately, you didn't win it, I think there's a lot more people aware of Iron Man VR and sort of your studio now. Actually, I think that'd be really good for you coming into the new year.
I actually look at it as a victory for VR in general. Because if you look at the other nominees, it was a strong year, and then on top of all of that, you had Half-Life Alyx, which seems to be doing pretty well in sales. It won the Game of the Year, or the VR Game of the Year from Game Awards, and I think it won Game of the Year, not even like VR Game of the Year, just straight up Game of the Year from GameSpot. So that was I think I think this is a big milestone for VR. No other VR game has ever won an award that big in the history of the game industry.
It's testament to the improvement in just quality of VR and the way it's been executed now. I think it's really taking on a life of its own. It's becoming a lot more popular, and the quality is it's skyrocketed actually, I think, over the last sort of 2 to 3 years especially, and I can only see it going further upwards, shall we say.
Yes. So that's a super positive thing that gets me really happy for the future, really excited for the future.
And me when I pick up VR eventually. It's on the list. It's on the Christmas list. I don't think I'm getting it. I don't think I've been good this year, but we'll leave that there, I think.
Yeah, what's up with Santa, man? I'll talk to him and see what we can do.
Yeah. Santa, give me a VR set. Right. I'm going to dive in to where we left things last time, and I had a listen to what we were talking about in terms of why we think Shenmue it didn't necessarily captivate or capture the audience that it may have hoped to, and I put it to the forums actually, and I got some very interesting answers out of it. One user, his name's HM Johnny, and I'm going to quote the users because they're not my ideas. These are things they've come out with. Sure. Was very similar to your line of thinking actually, in terms of there was, as you put it, not enough red meat on in the game. He said that he felt, while he enjoyed Shenmue 1 itself, that the pacing was too slow, there wasn't enough action, the lack of waiting system hurt it. So that was sort of very much aligned with what you were saying to me previously. And it raised the question in my mind, and it's something that sort of come up sort of periodically over time, I think, is, do you think the series itself is judged on the flaws of the first game, so people didn't get beyond Shenmue 1 to see what would be considered as a matter of sort of opinion that Shenmue 2, which obviously is much more action-packed and is considered the better game, do you think it's judged on the flaws of the first game solely, or do you think it's beyond that?
Well, if you would have asked me, Matt, that question a year and a half ago before I replayed the series via the Shenmue 1 and 2 HD collection, I probably would have said, I think it was unfairly criticized, or that its weaknesses were heavily weighted towards the first game, and that it's unfortunate that the second game didn't get the credit that it deserved, because it did address a lot of the issues from the first game. But now, having played Shenmue 2 recently, I was actually surprised how cumbersome it was, and how there are moments where you're like, what am I supposed to do? And I'm supposed to just follow this guy around, the town. And my recollection of it was that it was a much more of a blockbuster experience, which it is comparatively. But again, like kind of just taking it all in for the first time in probably a decade since I had played it. Yeah, I was kind of surprised that it was still very. There was a lot of how do I say, like, pacing issues, and some, you could even just, like, I guess I'll just blurt it out. There were some parts I thought were just a little bit boring and tedious, so I think that sadly, despite the best efforts I think from Yu Suzuki and the team, I think that that the franchise 1 and 2 just put together, I think it has a unique flavor to it, and it has an acquired taste. And I think you, myself, and presumably everybody in the Shenmue Dojo community really likes that flavor, right? But I don't know if it's like really still like a mainstream friendly type of experience.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because it doesn't conform to what mainstream experiences are, does it? Really, it's its own game, it's its own world, it's its own thought process, if you like. And this sort of brings in another comment that came from the forums from a user called Mittens. I love that name. Yes. And he was saying that you could argue, and I'd be interested in your perception on this, is that actually, while the Shenmue audience isn't very big in terms of the wider mainstream gaming world out there, that actually it's found its market and its fan base perfectly because they have stayed for the whole journey in terms of 1, 2, the big gap, Shenmue 3, and hopefully beyond. What do you think about sort of that side of things?
I agree with Mittens. I think that the franchise is really special, and for those who understand it and got the game, they really got it, right? And they stick with it, and they're very loyal. And I think the Kickstarter obviously is a huge testament to that. 60,000 plus people, putting their hard-earned money towards a sequel to the game with the hopes and dreams that they all had. I think that really shows, the strength of that community, and the game is special. And as painful as it for me to, criticize some of the elements of the first 2 games, I still also say that it's one of my favorite game series of all time, and so it did something very special. I think we all recognize that, and I think if I could speak for the community, I think we just wish more people could have had that experience, or could have fallen in love with it as much as we do, because at the end of the day, it's a consumer product.
Yeah.
And and for us to get more of this consumer product, we need more people in this militia of diehard Shenmue people that are willing to shell out the money. So the business all makes sense to develop follow-ups to the franchise. So I think we're all on the same page about that, and I just really want the same to continue as much as everybody else does, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Of course we do. And it's interesting. You mentioned the business side of things, and sort of the way. I just wonder, thinking, if you look at sort of Shenmue 3 and the merchandise that's available out there, the different variations of the game in terms of collector's editions, in terms of have you seen the limited run editions?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I suppose my sort of thought around it is have they realised that actually they've got a market in terms of the fan base, the community, and we are getting slightly trickles of new people are finding the games and enjoying them, which is fantastic. But I think, and this is all, again, I'd like your thoughts on it. Is my thoughts are they know the fan base, and they know that when merchandise comes out or products that have Shenmue on it, they know from a business perspective that we're going to pick them up and buy them. So does that in that sense add into the further viability of a potential extension of the series, a 4th game, or whatever way it went? Do you think it adds to that?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. And that being said, the kind of the different revenue streams is a little bit confused, right? Because there's Sega that has a license, right, where they get their cut, and then there's WiseNet as a developer, and then you have Deep Silver, the publisher of Shenmue 3, but you also have Sega is the publisher of the HD 1 and 2 collection, and then you've got all the other other entities in the mix, such as Epic Game Store, Limited Run, and so on. And so, but holistically, the more that Shenmue products, including the upcoming anime, right, the more success that they have from a viewership perspective or a sales perspective, it's an easier conversation to have when business people look at their spreadsheets and say whether or not they should be funding a future extension of the franchise. Again, whether it's a game or it's an anime or what have you, right? And so, yeah, the fans actually can influence the future of Shenmue with their hard-earned money, but it's not a guarantee, as you know. And I think one other really interesting aspect of all this, which you helped me realize, is that as you know, we have this really hardcore community that we're a part of.
Yeah.
We're fans of a relatively expensive type of game to make, which makes the prospect even more difficult, right? It would be one thing if we were just diehard fans of, I don't know, like, I'm trying to think of a good game, like, I don't know the budget of this game at all, but like, let's say Ori and the Blind Forest, or Ori and the Will of the Wisps.
Yeah.
I would assume that Moon Studios, that the budget for that game is less than like a typical Shenmue game, right?
Yeah.
So you could presumably have a smaller community rally around Ori, and then the numbers make sense to make a sequel, and then make another sequel, and make another sequel. Now, granted, it's a very successful franchise, so not a great apples to apples comparison, but I think you get the point.
Yeah.
And so I think that's another part of, like, I think the misery that we all have to experience as Shenmue fans, right, is because we not only have to convince business people to finance future extensions of the product, and when it comes to games, that's a very expensive prospect.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, looking at Shenmue 3 alone, I mean, I know it raised $6 million on Kickstarter, but when you consider that obviously a chunk of that is then lost to Kickstarter rewards, Kickstarter fees, and then you're trying to build an open world in the vein of the first two games, which we know are very, very expensive to develop, it's a challenge in itself in terms of getting that Shenmue feel, getting that, I'm trying to think of the words for it, getting that true sequel to it. And I felt Shenmue 3 did that very, very well in terms of setting the atmosphere and setting the tone, and was a natural progression from Shenmue 2 in the way it presented itself. And
yeah, let me
sorry, carry on.
Talk about that let me address that real quick, Matt, because this is an area that I think you and your listeners know is a topic that in the games industry, it's a little bit delicate to talk about when it comes to the money behind game development. And part of the reason that developers typically don't want to talk about it is because typically there is a fairly large disconnect between the realities of running a business and how expensive it could be, compared to what the average consumer thinks it should cost to make.
Yes.
So when they hear that this update or this DLC or this game is going to cost this many millions of dollars to create, typically they're thinking, like, what are you guys doing? Like, having parties all day? Like, where are all those millions of dollars going? You know, like, who's driving around in Ferraris with these massive budgets? And the truth of the matter is, unless we're talking about the big successful games, there's nobody driving around Ferraris. In fact, like, a lot of developers, myself included, have broken even or in fact lost money on games because we're passionate about it. We put our savings towards development, and I know for a fact that the Shenmue development was done incredibly respectfully when it comes to the budget, and very conservatively, I should say. And in the budget that you know from Kickstarter, in addition to some of the other monies that they were able to assemble, the amount of content and technology that they delivered per dollar is extremely high. Compared to most developments.
And it's something I'd agree with, and it'll feed into one of my next questions down the line. But I do agree with you. I mean, I think Yu Suzuki quoted, I think it was around $20 million was the final overall budget, and that was in an IGN Japan interview a while ago. And when you think about open world games, the sort of the main line was like Assassin's Creed, Grand Theft Auto. They cost well beyond that. well
So
beyond that.
they're in the hundreds of millions of US dollars. Yes.
So we wind it back to Shenmue 3 and what we have got from it. Criticisms aside, just for a moment, I think we've ended up with a true sequel, which got, for me, the Shenmue atmospherics. It got the feel. It got those things right, which maybe I came in thinking, well, it's a Kickstarter project. It's not got the backing of Sega in terms of financially. Maybe in my head, I sort of said, right, okay, it's not going to be like Shenmue 1 and 2 in terms of the content of those games. But if it gives me the Shenmue atmosphere and some Shenmue moments, I'm all in. But we look at it and think, you've got the atmospherics, obviously, and the feel of the game. They've had to, like we said in part one of our sort of interviews, they've had to build that from scratch. They've had no source code. They've had none of that reference material. So an insane amount of time's gone into building the systems of the game that work. Then you've got to consider motion capture for Ryo's fighting, which motion capture, as we know, is not cheap. No matter what level you go in at, it's not cheap. You've got 2 dubs in there, fully voiced dubs, Japanese and English. Now, I know from talking to some of the English voice actors, they did some overtime work and they did some bits and pieces cheaper than they would have done normally because it was Shenmue, which is fantastic. But again, it feeds into your point of dollar per dollar, what have we got? And to get a fully open world game with the content we had is phenomenal, considering the restraints they had. And also, at one point, I think is missed sometimes in this, is as far as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, when Deep Silver came in as the publisher in 2017, obviously they came in with a chunk of money, so the budget was never static. So how hard is it to plan in terms of what you're doing when you don't know your final budget?
Well, that's an internal question for game developers. It's very difficult, right? And I would wager that for most large scale games that as upwards of 90% of those games, they go over budget and they go over time, and I think that with especially with Shenmue 3, I believe that budget was constantly in flux. But it's very difficult to do. It's very difficult to know, to like call your shot years prior about how much it's actually going to cost and then when you're going to actually ship it. But that is really the challenge, and that is really what your job is to do as an executive producer. And I know that Yu-san took that job very seriously, and I think overall he did a really great job. As we've talked about, we understand the deficiencies of Shenmue 3. My biggest complaint obviously is the lack of mainline story content in the game. Which really, as far as I'm concerned, has very little to do with the budget. I think that was just an oversight on his part. But that all being said, that team, as you mentioned, Matt, just did an incredible job recreating the whole genuine Shenmue experience for a very small amount of money comparatively to what they had prior. And sorry to talk a little bit about my own project, but in some ways, Shenmue reminds me of the development of Marvel's Iron Man VR, and I bring that up only because, like most games that are built from scratch, developers end up spending typically the vast majority of their time building systems, building the architecture, discovering what the game is about, and then once they do that, they look at their calendar and they realize that they only have 6 months or maybe even less to actually make the real game, and that's what you just scrambled to complete, compared to what sequels have. And you might say, well, Shenmue 3 is a sequel. Well, not in the traditional sense. They weren't building off the original code base, as we mentioned, right? So they don't have the luxury of just dusting off those tools and just iterating on them. They were starting from scratch. So same with Iron Man. It was a big scramble towards the end to just make the video game. Same thing with our first game, Republic, and like so many other products I know. And I'm always very jealous of those of the developers who can actually just build off of the existing framework from the previous game. And you could look at, and then I'll also say this very bold and outlandish claim, and then we can move on. But I have this whole thesis about how the vast majority of the greatest games of all time, the vast majority of people's favorite video games are sequels, or they are quasi sequels, meaning maybe they don't have a number 2 or number 3 after them, but they came out of previous experience or previous technology that team had worked on before. It's very rare for a great game to come from a team that has never worked in that genre, who has never worked on a similar type of game, and just like kind of built that game out of the ether because of all those things I just described. You can almost count that on those types of games on maybe on 2 hands. Games like Portal, Tetris, and a handful of other games that come to mind. But typically speaking, GoldenEye is another one. But typically, those great games are built off of previous successes. And you could even say that Shenmue was that way because of Virtual Fighter, right? Shenmue wouldn't exist if it wasn't for Virtual Fighter.
No, it wouldn't. And it obviously had the core mechanic of the fighting system in there from Virtua Fighter. And it was all built around that Virtua Fighter franchise, but obviously then sort of morphed into its own franchise, its own story, etc. But I'm going to bring it sort of back in. Obviously, we talk about the content of Shenmue 3 itself, and one thing that's sort of has been discussed around the community is obviously you mentioned the budget management and how actually diligent they were with it, considering what they had. There's been a few sort of comments around that maybe Shenmue should have cut back on certain things, like the 2 dubs, like maybe instead of having 2 big open world areas, just having 1. What I'm getting at is that if they changed the formula of Shenmue for the budget or for any other reasons, be it to make it more mainstream or whatever it is, do you think it would alienate the community, and how does it strike the balance between attracting sort of the newer players into it, but also keeping the core community, the sort of the lifeblood, if you like, happy and keep us engaged? How do you think that would work?
Very difficult. I'd like to address this like through two different takes on it. One is to kind of get to the heart of the question, is that I'm of the belief that Shenmue 3 would have greatly benefited from a reduction in scale and scope. And that's sometimes difficult for a guy like me to say, because like a lot of game directors, it's kind of our job to push for scope, and it's typically the job of the developers, the boots on the ground, to push back against scope, right? And it's this interesting tug of war throughout development. And so I understand what Yusan was trying to do, and he's being very ambitious with Shenmue 3. And I think in some ways, I think it was overly ambitious, right, for the team that they had, the budget, the time that they had. And I think that the franchise would be even healthier today had Shenmue 3 been about half the length. And I still like having the 2 towns. I still think that makes it feel like Shenmue, but I don't know if we needed to have as much ancillary content and ancillary story content. I think if we could flip it around and have that ratio be more focused on the main saga story content with less ancillary new characters and those kinds of things, I think the game would have benefited greatly from that. And then had the game benefited from that, and the review scores had been higher, I think we would have had more people playing Shenmue 3 and being really fascinated by it, and seeing a higher level of quality too, because when you reduce scope, typically that increases the quality of the remaining content. And so I think the content would have been just the quality would have been increased overall. That being said, I don't necessarily agree about the dubbing or like having scaling back the languages, only because typically, and I don't know about the contract obviously between WiseNet and Deep Silver, but typically the voiceover budget, localization budget, QA is typically budget that's held by the publisher, that those costs. So I would be surprised if that came out of the actual development dollars. So those are those thoughts. And then curious what you think about that, Matt, and then I'll tell a story about the scope of and scale of Shenmue 3 once you're ready.
Yeah, I do agree with you. I think it's difficult. I think coming from where Shenmue 3 did in terms of wanting it to be a true sequel, I think there was a lot of pressure on it from the community. I think, and it sort of plays into another question of mine, again, we'll probably touch on in a minute, is what the fans expected for what the team had. So you're quite right. There's this disconnect between the average consumer and what goes on behind the scenes in terms of what you can actually do. So I think there's a body of fans out there who, and they're not wrong to be thinking this, in terms of, they are correct in terms of, like you say, the story content isn't there like it should be. Maybe they should have scaled it back. So I think they were in a very difficult position with what they had, in terms of, you would not necessarily alienate, but you would maybe sort of employ some discontent in one area of the fan base had they gone down for that sort of reduced scope, if you like, sort of, instead of a 30-hour game, say 15-hour game. So, and maybe not quite as open world as Shenmue 3 was. There's a bulk of the community that have said they liked the fact it was open world because it felt like the first two games. It's a balancing act, isn't it, in terms of how. And it's an enviable position for Wisenet, I think, in some respects, because there's that expectation from the fans, also because the fans were keen bringing it back, I think. And my own personal opinion on it is, I think whatever they'd have done, I think there would have been a reaction to it that wasn't wholly positive. I think you'd have always had some community members who would not have been happy with what came out because of their own expectations over 15 years, and that's down to the individual, I think, at the end of the day.
Yeah, agreed. And but I agree with you that you're never gonna be able to satisfy everybody. But I have to think that had the game been 15 hours in length, and had some of the ancillary content been cut, and the overall quality of the game had gone up, and there was more mainline story content, that I'd like to think that a large portion of the Shenmue community would be really happy about that and excited for the next game. And that in retrospect, in my opinion, would have been the better move. But it's really difficult, again, like, to call your shot really early on, because, as you know, the fans are asking for everything, and then also, but Yusan also wants to provide it. He wants to give them an authentic console experience, or a sequel, and that kind of leads nicely into the story I was going to tell you, because I was thinking about, ahead of this conversation we're having today, I was thinking this morning about what kind of stories could I share from the development, and I remembered back to many years ago. This is prior to the Kickstarter, when there was a lot of discussion between myself and Yusan and a number of other individuals, back when still Wisenet was only 2 employees. So not any core development was even started, but we're just talking about what the scope and scale and the vision for this game would be. And I was really challenging him to think about how could you deliver on an authentic Shenmue sequel, while also not signing yourselves up for as many features as a Shenmue 1 or Shenmue 2 has, because just collecting the budget for that type of game would be prohibitively expensive. That's what I told him. But what ended up happening was, Yusan, and bless his heart, came back to me one day and said, okay, well, it's just going to be an extremely stripped down version, almost like, imagine like a Telltale like experience.
Yeah.
Right? And I remember thinking, oh, man, it was me and a couple other individuals were at a dinner at an Italian restaurant in Tokyo, and he was really fighting hard for this. And I said, look, I want the mainline story just as much as the next guy does, right? But if we're going to do a Kickstarter and we're trying to revive the Shenmue franchise, I don't know if this kind of side story and like not like mainline, not feeling like a real Shenmue game type of experience would really set the community on fire and really revive the franchise as much as we want to, right? And we had a really, really healthy and like impassioned debate about it. And so at the end of the day, I guess I won the argument, because he came back with this more fully fleshed out vision for Shenmue 3. But I think the game that I had in my head and then the game that he had in his head were very different, because then I remember going back, like fast forward a couple of years when development is really hitting full gear on Shenmue 3. And I remember going in and checking in on the game and thinking like, whoa, wait, you guys are making that too, and you guys are doing that system as well. You're bringing that system back too, and you're going to do these new things. This is extremely ambitious and also a little bit worrisome, right, to a certain extent. But look, I could see the fire in Yu Suzuki's eye. He was going to do it. He was going to deliver on a genuine Shenmue game. And so it was interesting that those kind of the pendulum would swing back and forth throughout the initial ideation phase of development. And I think again, like where he landed out was like probably a little bit too ambitious, but I respect the hell out of him for doing that.
It wouldn't be Yu Suzuki and his games if he didn't. I think.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I think if he had it, and it is difficult because you have to strike a balance. But if he'd have compromised on his own ambitions to it, would it have lost its soul?
I think that was at risk. I think that would be at risk. As much as some people, there's people in your community, I know that say that sometimes, like, just give me the story. It could be in a manga, it could be an anime, it could be like in a book, but just give me the story. And I understand that because I to a certain extent, I feel that way sometimes too. But every time I talk to Yusan, I just remind him. I said, look, let's at least try every single thing we can to make sure that we finish this saga in the way that it started, right, through a game, through this type of game.
Yeah, and I'm like you. For me, if it's like the anime and everything around it, it's only good for the series. But I and I've said it publicly many times. I want Shenmue to be concluded in game form. And I understand the limitations around budget and the size of the community, the market, etc. But for me, I love Shenmue deeply, and it's my favorite series of all time. But it would lose a part of that magic for me if it wasn't a game, and that's just my opinion. And I'm sure there's others out there who share that. But for me, if it wasn't a game, of course I'd be behind it. Absolutely, it's Shenmue. I will be behind it all the way. But on a personal level, it would just lose some of that magic for me. And despite the limitations around what obviously they had with Shenmue 3 and all the valid criticisms that are out there, they still delivered for me a piece of magic. And I'll go to I think it's Rainbow Basin in Bailu Village, where they come across it's referred to in the translation as a second Shenmue tree, but I'm not sure if it is or not, or whether that's a translation error. But you see the mark on the tree from where someone's been training, and it gives you that little cutscene to Ryo and his dad under the cherry tree in the Hazuki Dojo, and it starts playing Memories of Distant Days, and that's what Shenmue's about for me. It's that magical moment where it hits you in the right place. It hit the right emotions there for me. And so from a personal perspective, I felt the game was successful in doing that. But I would be remissive to overlook the valid criticisms in terms of the story content and maybe some of the systems that are involved. I know the stamina system is one that divides opinion quite heavily within our community. And I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, I'm glad you brought it up because one of the completed pieces of homework that I brought to this conversation is I end up looking over my notes from just before release of the game. So I'll, if that's okay, Matt, I'll just share some of my own notes that I had.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, please.
So just for a little bit of context before we go into them, I had the really distinct privilege and honor to be able to play the game throughout development and be able to provide feedback. And I provided feedback in the form of many hundreds of pages of notes with screenshots and scribbles on them, and I would send them out to the team and work with them on and trying to resolve some issues, and also helped organize playtests here in the Seattle area to help further give the team good information about what actual players are how they're experiencing the game, and helping kind of guide the direction and the focus of the game in its remaining months of development. And so yeah, just to give you kind of a glimpse, like again, it was many months of me providing notes, but I was just kind of dusting off one from pretty close to the release, and I'm curious if some of my feedback aligns with the rest of the communities. But one of the things I was asking for, which I think actually got in at the last second, was I wanted to make sure that the player had a warning message before they leave Bailu Village, because prior to release, you would just go up to the tower and it would just kick you out to Niawu, and that was it. um, you couldn't go back to Bailu Village, obviously, and it was a surprise. And if you didn't complete any of the subquests and things like that, it was a little bit disappointing. So I think they actually added that. That was really nice. But that was
Yeah.
one of my bits of feedback towards the end. The other thing that didn't get addressed, which I think a lot of people are aware of, and I wish it had been addressed, was that the economy was pretty rigid and pretty punishing. And I really wish that those difficulty spikes when it comes to collecting 5,000 yuan for certain items it was a little bit too much. And I begged and pleaded with Yu Suzuki about that, and he won at the end of he won that battle. But I like to think that I won the war, because a lot of people in the reviews called that out, and I could say like, hey dude, like yeah, I was right. But hey, all's well that ends well, I guess. I'm looking over some stuff that was also addressed, but it's not necessarily perfect. But in development there was a lot of I had a lot of issues with some of the controls and some of the locomotion, which actually were ironed out a lot before release. They have one of the engineers over at WiseNet named Eric. He's just an absolutely brilliant guy, and he's behind a lot of systems in this game. He did such great work. Good close personal friend of mine, and I would get on calls with him and say like, hey, this doesn't feel like exactly like I would imagine would feel like if I'm coming back from like the Dreamcast games. And he took that feedback really, really well. And we worked really closely to make sure that it didn't feel like too much like a modern game where you could just, do everything you would want to do like an Assassin's Creed game, because that wouldn't necessarily feel like controlling Ryo Hazuki. But it also, wasn't as stiff as maybe it was in the past. And so trying to find that delicate balance, I don't think we really hit it perfectly, but I think the team did a good job. As I'm looking over my notes, I think he was able to address a lot of those issues.
I don't think you were far off with it in terms of the feel of the game and the way he, just thinking of playing it, because I was playing it a couple of weeks ago. I think it's not too far off. I think if a Shenmue 4 was to come out, I think they'd nail that particular bit on the head. And
agreed. There's a little bit work left to go, but I think you're right. I think they got pretty close.
Yeah, and again, it's testament to that, obviously, that feedback being taken on and listened to. But again, I think that's part of your role as also, because you're a fan at the end of the day as well. So you're coming at it from not just a business point of view and a development point of view, but as a fan. So it works both ways, doesn't it, in that respect, in terms of the feedback you're giving. You're giving it because it's derived from a feel from the original 2.
Yes, exactly.
So it's
looking over my notes a little bit more, but I one thing I try to do, and I think if anybody in your community ever has the opportunity to give feedback, whether it's on a video game or anything else, right? It's always good to balance your feedback with the negative along with the positive.
Yeah, of course.
That way the team knows that you've got their back, and then you also need to remind them of what is good, so like they don't actually go and try to change it. And one of the things that I remember just being really thrilled about, I don't know how you felt about this, Matt, but when you're in the second town, and you get on you can actually make those phone calls right to those classic Shenmue characters, and like the setup for that and the camera angle and the look of the phone, and then like the video playback that they do for some of those things, I just thought that was really, really well executed, and I was really delighted when I got to that part of the game.
I was really pleased with it because obviously it was mentioned in the Kickstarter in terms of there was going to be international phone calls, but for me, it was in my head of, I want to be able to call home. I want to be able to call the people I've spoken to previously. So for me, when it turned out you could call the Dojo, you could call Nozomi, you could call Guiza. For me, it was what I had in my head of how I thought it would feel. So actually, for me personally, I really enjoyed those calls. And as a Kickstarter backer, I had the Kickstarter card with it. So I spent, I don't know how long, sitting there just listening to all the conversations and getting those out. So yeah, I completely agree with you. I think that was a very well executed point on it. And actually, for me personally, another thing I thought they executed very sort of well. They didn't quite hit the mark, but I think there's certainly room for improvement. And actually, I thought the fighting system worked once you got your head around it. And if I was giving feedback on it, and this is me personally, I'd be saying it needs a better tutorial. Given that we've come from a Virtua Fighter system, or new players who we pick it up for the first time and it comes up and it says hit these buttons, but it doesn't give you much else. And I know Shenmue's about discovery and about feeling your way through these things. But I think for new people coming in, or certainly older players coming back, it could have done with a tutorial in terms. It wouldn't need to be very, very long. It wouldn't need to hold your hand necessarily, but it just needed a bit more fleshing out, I think, around how that system worked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's an area that I think the WiseNet team has heard loud and clear about the battle system, and they knew that there was it wasn't hitting the mark all the way, including with the tutorial, right? They just ran out of time, and but again, I think given the resources that they had and like knowing what they had to go through to even get it to that level, I just have like the utmost respect for them. And I agree with you. I think like once you really get down into like the nitty gritty of its nature, it's pretty good. But I think that I know that they wish it could have been a little bit better.
Yeah, and again, it sort of goes back to a point we've made already, is that core system is now in existence. They've built it, so all they can do is improve upon it and use that as a basis to go forward. And I know Yusan himself has said that he wants to put throws back into the system.
Yes.
And I know that was
a big bit of feedback that we kept getting consistently, which I was actually surprised by. I remember thinking it when I was playing an earlier build of the game, but it didn't bother me to the level that it bothered some players that we would come in and have them play. And they were just saying, like, I guess like the throw system was just a really big and integral part of that experience for a lot of people who played Shenmue 1 and 2, versus like somebody like me. I guess I just didn't do it as much. But yeah, it was very important to a lot of people, and I'm happy that Yusan, if there is a sequel, that he really wants to make that a priority.
Yeah, and so I think sort of the basis of that comment or that feedback is from some people. Obviously, in Shenmue 2, you learn the counter elbow assault, which is it is a counter attack.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think in Shenmue 3, it doesn't have that essence of a counter attack because you haven't got that system in place for it.
Right.
Which I think that's where some of the feedback comes from in terms of the throws. I think I'm with you. I was more, when I played the originals, I used striking a lot more. So the new system felt a bit more natural, but I can see where people are coming from in terms of the throw system. And also he does jiu-jitsu, which is a heavily throw-based martial art, which again, but it doesn't, they've taken that feedback on, and hopefully when we see a Shenmue 4, we'll have that throw system in place, and it'll just that fighting system be tightened up. And I think when you delve into the nitty-gritty of it in terms of stringing combinations together, actually it flows together really nicely. There's some nice combinations in there, and the moves look really smooth. It's like you say, I think they ran out of time, and they needed to get the game out. So I think certainly from my perspective, I recognise that actually there is a core system there that isn't very far off being excellent. It just needs refinement.
Yeah, so I totally agreed.
Feeding into sort of a point we picked up earlier around fan expectations. Do you think the fan expectations influenced the community's reaction to the final product when it came out?
Yeah, I think it's impossible for it not to, right? And I think that I followed the release very closely, the reactions to the game very closely, and I really stand by what I told Yusan going into the release, which is that they should be very proud of what they built, which you and I've talked about a lot today. But there are these like really big outstanding issues that the community, I think, is right to wish had been better, or there had been more inclusion of certain things. And yeah, they were the first people to get their hands on the game for the most part, because as you know, like even the game reviews were held back quite a bit.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of people I guess from what I could tell, a lot of like the onlookers, like there's a lot more people who played Shenmue than who are Shenmue hardcore fans, obviously.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of people are familiar with this franchise, and from what I could tell is that a lot of people were waiting and seeing to see how the community reacted to it. And because it wasn't 100% positive, I think there's a lot of folks who are on the fence decided that maybe this is not the game for them, or they're going to wait till the game comes up on Steam or something like that. So yeah, I think that the fan community had a big influence on the game's release and its overall reception, which I think is appropriate because it's a game built for the fans ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you bring sort of Steam into it. I know we sort of looked at this afternoon. came into the top 20 of November sales in Steam, actually, based on 2-week revenue. So I was really pleased to see that.
Yes.
Because I know it's had, depending on what you read in the media, in terms of its sales, haven't necessarily. I don't know the sales numbers or anything, but some media outlets would have you believe it completely bombed, and I don't necessarily think that's the case. And seeing it do that well on Steam, I don't know, it's music to my ears a little bit, but I'm biased.
No, it's good. No, of course. I mean, we all want it to be successful, right? Even for the players who didn't like the game, I would have to think that they ultimately want it to be successful. So there's more content coming down the pipe, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right in terms of had the reception been better, I think more people would have picked it up. But actually, when you think about it in terms of what we've got coming forward for Shenmue, we have an anime which sort of come out of left field a little bit. There's plenty of merchandise out there now, and I believe more is probably coming. My wallet is probably screaming at me to not buy anything else, and my wife is probably saying the same thing.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, yeah, I won't. Yeah, she'll kill me. But I think we're in such a better position now, despite the valid criticisms, but also the quality of product that has come out, and the team should be proud of what Shenmue III is, because it is a wonderful experience and it's a game I love. But I think we are, and tell me if you disagree, but I think we're in a far better position now than we were. Could it be better? Maybe. But
of course, it could be a lot better. It could be a lot better, Matt. But I agree with you that we're in a much better position now than we were in 2013, 2014, and all the many years prior to that, right? Where it was just nothing, right?
Yeah.
If you compare to where we were 6 years ago, 7 years ago, Yusan was not doing much game development. WiseNet was 2 employees. There was no Shenmue 3. There's no Kickstarter. And it was kind of a distant memory. It was just a franchise that the Shenmue Dojo community knows this very well. It would just every once in a while like have a blip on the radar because it would appear on some, I don't know, websites like top 10 most wanted or most sought after video game franchises or something like that. That was basically its claim to fame for so long. And now we've got a new game that came out recently. We've got many more people who are familiar with the franchise now than ever were familiar with it before. We've got this upcoming anime, that I think that's worth getting excited about. And the most important thing, though, is that Yusan is still leading up WiseNet. It's still filled with lots of really talented developers. They've got this baseline of Shenmue 3, and they're trying to figure out what they're going to do next. And we don't know what it's going to be. They're still figuring that out. But I think like everybody else, I hope that they have another opportunity to work in Shenmue. And so that I think just by definition, I think things are much better now than they were 6-7 years ago.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think and we've touched on this before. I think the anime, could be key to that actually in terms of attracting new people, because
I agree.
Not everybody is going to want to play a game from 1999-2000 to catch up with the story. So right. I'm being presumptuous now, but assuming it catches up to the end of Shenmue 3, and you've got a good base of people following the anime who then discover the games because of the name, we're all at the same point in terms of the story. So then you, from a business perspective, and if I'm talking out of turn, please tell me and correct me, but I think if you've got, it just adds to the viability of the 4th game in terms of you've got that anime crowd who can come across, plus you've got the community, that hardcore community that is still there. Put that together, and I think your market's much wider.
Absolutely agreed. For folks like you and me who want more Shenmue games, one of the best things that can happen is if that anime really takes off, right?
Yeah.
As you mentioned, it'll just create like a much better and more healthy ecosystem of content, and it'll make those conversations a lot easier to get proper funding for future titles, because the anime is just doing so well. So I'm just like you and everybody else is hoping that they just do an incredibly good job with it, that people get behind it, that they get excited about this really great franchise and storyline that we love. And yeah, and then I'm always like I'm an internal optimist, and I feel good about things. I was actually just catching up with Yusan just last night over the phone, just hearing about some of the stuff he's been working on, and I was just encouraging him like I always do, right? And as long as he's surrounded by people that love him and want him to be successful, I have to think that he's gonna be able to continue to keep this thing going, and as fans, we can continue to see more and more Shenmue content.
I'm going to move away from Shenmue very quickly because there's something I did want to cover before I release you to the world. Two things actually. The first one is obviously around the new generation of consoles and the technology in them. How do you think that's going to influence games going forward? So, and maybe even for your studio, Camouflage.
Well, I'm very lucky that I have both the new PlayStation and new Xbox consoles, and I love them. I think they're really excellent pieces of hardware. The solid state drive is a game changer in a lot of ways, and it actually impacts and positively impacts the way that I'm playing games. I found actually, because I used to get into this rhythm. I would imagine that some of your listeners get into as well, in that you play a little section of the game, then you hit a loading screen, and then that's when you check your phone, or you kind of just get disconnected. And also, so not only does it keep you more engaged, but what I also found is that it changed my behavior when I'm playing Demon Souls, for example. So if you'd allow me to digress real quick, I finished Demon Souls a few weeks back, and what I noticed was happening was that I thought, you know what, sadly, I do have to farm for this item, and I know where to get it, and but I decided to do it mainly because it's far less painful than it used to be, because again, I'd have to warp to the space and then go back to the Nexus and then warp back to that space. And if I was playing this thing on PS3, it would have taken about twice the amount of time. But because I knew that those load times, I was like, wait a second, this is actually really fast for me to reload this space and go back in here and then farm this thing. It actually like changed the way I played the game, because I wasn't trying to avoid load times, is a better way to put it. So I thought that was interesting. That being said, though, and I hate to like come off a little bit as a curmudgeon when it comes to this, is that I think the new hardware is great, but I don't think it's going to fundamentally impact the way that games are developed and or enjoyed by consumers as much as cloud gaming is going to be. And you might be listening and think like, oh, here we go. Here's somebody who have you ever played like a cloud game? Like, my internet provider doesn't allow me to do it, or what happens when the internet goes out, or yes. What about my data cap limits? Yes. What the technology is not there yet? Yes. Like all the reasons why in the short term you may think that cloud gaming is just not for you. Totally understood, and probably most likely I agree with you. But as the internet infrastructure becomes more robust, as 5G becomes actually more of a mature technology, and then as these larger players in the industry invest more and more technology and R&D into these efforts, and then lastly, as developers have more access to these tools and are able to utilize cloud-based CPU, GPU, other technologies, right? That is when things are going to really change, and it is actually, quite frankly, not related to the newly released consoles, because just by the pure nature of cloud gaming, you could be playing, in theory, on any sort of device, no matter how powerful it is. So for me, that is really where the future of where game development is going to really change, and I couldn't be more excited about that.
I can agree with you too, actually. I managed to sign up for the beta of xCloud actually, and I was
oh, nice.
And I was very impressed with it and how solid it was. I mean, I'm lucky enough to live in a town with a really good internet connection, but I think as well, one thing with cloud gaming is you take the expense out of owning a console or a PC, because that's a big outlay, isn't it? When you buy a console for the new PlayStation, it was £425 in the UK,
right?
Or if you go and buy like a high-end gaming PC, you could be paying thousands of dollars for something like that. You remove that barrier completely by paying, I don't know, $25 a month or whatever they charge at the moment. And that's more palatable to users, I think, isn't it, as well, in terms of if you've got someone who's on the fence about coming into the gaming world, but they see $25, £25 a month, they go, well, do you know what? I'll give it a go. It's not that much compared to buying a console, and then they get hooked and they're in that system. And I think it's just going to widen gaming in terms of its accessibility as well. It can only be a good thing, I think.
You're right. When you look at the proliferation of gaming, and you look at how many consumers out there enjoy games, and you look at the history of that graph, it has a pretty modest year-on-year gain, and obviously comes out of the United States with Atari, right? And then you have and then there's another handful of like Commodore 64, obviously out of the UK and Japan, but you're talking about primarily Japan, North America, and Western Europe, and then PC gaming, it starts to really take off, but you see this massive spike in people who would declare themselves as being gamers, and that is specifically because of the smartphone. And that is a device that is in the hands of literally billions of people across the planet who are finally starting to consume gaming content because they didn't have to go to the store, as you mentioned, Matt. Like they didn't have to go to drop hundreds of dollars onto a gaming console or thousands of dollars, even $500 for a relatively inexpensive PC. They have the gaming device in their pocket, and that was just a massive step towards the global just a global takeover of gaming, really, as like the primary entertainment pastime for so many people now. And so, what's ironic about it all is that you've got now, which console gamers do not like to talk about this, but the reality of it is that like the games that we all talk about, Shenmue, Halo, GTA, what have you, right, are still only a small part of that conversation when you look at the global market, right? And what the games that the global consumers playing. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited about cloud gaming, to bring it all back, is because once cloud gaming becomes much more popular and accessible on any device across the world, assuming that these larger companies can figure these partnerships out, now finally we could have these players in India or in Brazil or other parts of the world, in the Middle East, that might have like fallen in love with gaming because of Candy Crush or Clash of Clans or Angry Birds, right? But now we can finally present to them these really great experiences, such as like the console games and the PC games that we all love, Shenmue included. And that I just can't wait for that to hopefully become a reality.
I don't think it's far off. I know Microsoft are on a real big drive for it at the moment. You've got Stadia as well. You've got the Amazon variant has just come out. The name eludes me right now.
Oh yeah, Lumia, right?
That's it. And then obviously you've got Sony looking at it with PlayStation Now, aren't they, as well? So they're dipping their toes. It won't be long, I don't think. It won't be long.
Yeah, Nvidia, GeForce Now.
Oh yeah,
another
of course.
Player. I wouldn't be surprised if Steam tries to do something about this in the short term. But there's gonna be failures and there's gonna be successes, and it's gonna be it's gonna be fascinating to see who wins who comes out on top, because there's a lot of money at stake.
Yeah. Yes, that's where very much so. And okay, my last question, because I'm aware of the time, if it is what are your games of the year for 2020?
Well, as a diehard Shenmue fan, this will probably come to your audience as a major surprise, but my game of the year this year is Call of Duty Warzone. And I typically don't play those types of games. I typically don't play multiplayer games. I'm more of a story-driven person. But as during the development of Marvel's Iron Man VR, we had to survive many challenges and overcome many challenges throughout the development, especially this year, right? With the pandemic and having to go remote. And Warzone came out right around that time, and a coworker of mine who is a self-prescribed like communist or socialist, depending on the day, the last person that you would ever expect to say like, "Hey Ryan, we should play Call of Duty Warzone together." Like I think it was half of like a joke, but he went through with the joke. because he knows that I'm not like really into those games anymore. And we end up playing it and just having a great time. And then we started to call up other people in the office and say like, hey, once you guys are done after a long days of work working on Iron Man, like why don't we gather around in Call of Duty Warzone, this free to play battle royale version of Call of Duty, and play. And we just got really into it because it's got the great mechanics of battle royale, but it also has the really amazing, and have been for a long time, like just the core moment to moment mechanics of Call of Duty. The gunplay is great, the audio is great, the visuals are great, and so yeah, it just became like our kind of like, I don't know, like our after hours pub, if you will, after work. And yes, of course we're playing, of course we're competitive, but we're also just talking about the day. Like, oh, did you see that message we got from Sony about this? Or like, oh, we got to make sure that we respond to Marvel tomorrow. Or what do you guys think about this? It just became this ritual we had every night, and it was surreal. And because we couldn't meet each other in real life, I'm not ashamed to say that was my favorite game of this year, and it was a really important game for me for the most part of 2020. It's Call of Duty.
Would you put money on saying that at the start of the year?
No, absolutely not. No, absolutely not. I would be thinking my game of the year would probably be Cyberpunk. That's probably what I would have expected, even though I haven't had a chance to play it yet. But yeah, I would not have expected that, Matt. But it was a pleasant surprise, and I recommend it for people. I think it's a really good game.
I'm awful at it, but it's good fun. I will say that.
It's good fun. I'm terrible at it too.
I suck. Yeah, it's embarrassing, actually, embarrassingly bad. But it's one of those things you can sit down and just, I don't know, just cut things off and just have however long and just enjoy it. And I think that's what games are at the end, and what games should be is you sit down, you enjoy that game for whatever reason, and that's what gaming is for me. And that what it was as a kid, and it's what it is now. It's something that is a pastime, something that I'll always enjoy. And I think that's the core of what I think anybody that I speak to who I have spoken to in the industry says. As long as you're enjoying it, it doesn't matter what you're playing or what you're playing it on. You're playing games, enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No. At the end of the day, that's what we're just rallying around. Is like the enjoyment behind these franchises that we found connections with for whatever reason or another, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right, Ryan, I'm gonna bring us to a close there because we've gone well over the hour. Unless you want to hang around, I don't want to get you in trouble.
Oh no, I should probably I should go get back to work. This is my last day at the office technically, and then we're on holiday. And just wishing you and your listeners happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Appreciate all you do, Matt, and your colleagues in the community. And just like as always, I just want everybody to know just how much I love and respect you all. And I'm fighting every single day I can to try to support this franchise that we all love. And just wish me luck, and please keep encouraging me and you, Son, and the team. And hopefully we just have more and more things to celebrate in the Shenmue franchise moving forward.